Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and I am joined on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube show today by Matt Vensel, our Penguins reporter. We're finally going to get some Penguins talk on the YouTube channel for the first time. It's September, so things are going to be heating up. It's been the off season, but we're going to be getting into some hockey here before we know it. So I wanted to get Matt on to talk about some preseason storylines, in addition to maybe a couple other things regarding the Steelers, Penn State, a little bit later on. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? Excited to talk hockey. Camp is a couple days away now.
Yeah, it's getting exciting. It's getting to be that time of year where we have all three teams doing stuff in terms of the Penguins, Pirates, Steelers, and of course the colleges. So it's always a fun time of year, that late kind of September, early October window when things are interesting. If you're just joining us for the first time, please remember to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe to our channel. We're coming up on 500. We'd love you to be the 500th, so please consider subscribing to the channel. And also, you will find a link to our subscription deal down in the description. $6 for 6 months of access to postgazette.com. You'll get everything I'm writing, everything Matt's writing, for $1 a month for the first 6 months. So if you've ever been curious about getting started with postgazette.com, that's a great way to do so. Matt, one of the things you've been doing is you've been writing a preseason primer, kind of a daily post of different topics regarding the Penguins. One thing you and Jason have both done in the last couple of days is touched on the the Penguins prospects and farm system and some of the guys you think might make an impact in Pittsburgh in 2022. Could you highlight some of those names for me, maybe from most likely to least likely to be seen in Pittsburgh, and what you think their roles might be, once they get here?
Yeah, absolutely. This is my 5th year covering the team, and I've got to say there really haven't been too many prospects coming through that you felt excited about their potential to contribute just because they're contending, trading away picks and future assets. I do feel like this is a year where there's a few candidates to actually come in and contribute. I mean, there's not like some star level player or anything like that. But there are a few guys I think can help this team, which is good because it's a lot of 30-something players on this team. So when you look at the depth chart, there's obvious openings in the bottom 6 with the forward group. And the 3 leading candidates all skated together during rookie camp last week. And that's Sam Poulin, Valtteri Puustinen, and Philip Hollander. They all 3 of them bring a little something different to the table. Hollander's more of a checking two-way forward, sort of like a Teddy Bluger type, although he's a winger. Poulin is probably the best known Penguins prospect, the former first-round pick. He's rounded out his game. He's moved to center. He's probably never going to be like a 20, 30 goal guy in the league, but he's an interesting two-way player. And then there's Puustinen. I don't think any player's risen more over the last 2-3 years than him. I mean, he was a former 7th-round pick of the Jim Rutherford regime, productive player in Finland, but on the smaller side. Did some great things in his first season in North America last year. So he's a guy. He's a right winger. If they need someone to come in and score some goals, he's a candidate. And then on the blue line, I don't know if you consider these guys prospects because they've been around, but Pierre-Olivier Joseph, and then Ty Smith, the guy they got in the John Marino deal from New Jersey. So those are 5 guys. You can feel pretty good about them appearing in the lineup this year, and we'll see what they can do with that opportunity.
Could you explain, given what the Penguins spent in free agency this year to kind of keep that expensive veteran core together, how important is it for some of these guys to step up, maybe not to be, like you said, 30-goal scorers or star players on this team or Jake Gensel type guys, but contributors? Because I think back to those Stanley Cup runs when Brian Rust and Connor Sherry and guys like that were coming up, and they scored big goals in the playoffs, but in terms of their game-to-game production, they weren't 30-goal guys. They weren't Phil Kessel type guys. How important is it, if you're going to have an expensive core for at least the next 3 years, to have guys step up and give you that cheap production? If this team is going to make some kind of serious contending run for a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, well, it's important this year, in particular up front, because there are real questions about their bottom six, and their approach has just been to gather a bunch of guys, including these prospects, with the little cap space left over, and hope that six of them pan out. So, yeah, it's very important that at least one of these guys steps up, becomes a regular. Throw Drew O'Connor in there as well. So it's important in the short term because they need some guys to come in. And yeah, and you mentioned those cup runs. I mean, those guys weren't world beaters, although Jake Vensel was pretty darn close that one year. But just that youth, that energy, the kind of almost intangible element that brings to the team is important as well for have some young blood in the mix. And then projecting out, yeah, I mean, if the Penguins can actually have some of these guys on entry level contracts making less than $1 million come in and provide way more bang for their buck, then they don't have to go back to these Dominic Simone types, these kind of fringe NHLers that they've relied on over the last couple of years. You actually get guys who are providing more bang for the buck.
Matt, you've also done did a post recently about breaking down the Metropolitan Division. I'll include, by the way, we're going to mention a few articles. I'm going to include the link to all of those in the description. So if you're interested in reading more, check that out. But Matt, how is the Metro Division shaping up this year, given the moves that other teams made in addition to the Penguins?
Yeah, the division is not as stacked as we've maybe seen it in the last couple of years. I mean, I think it's definitely not the league's worst division, but I think even in the East, the Atlantic, which we've seen for years, I mean, the Metro would put in 5 teams some years. This might be a year where the Atlantic has 5 teams to get in. So, but yeah, in the Metro, I mean, I do think there's a clear top team in the division. That's Carolina. They won the division last year. Made a few moves, but the biggest one was bringing in Brent Burns, the former Norris winning defenseman. He's an older guy, but at minimum, you should boost their power play. They've got a good, young, deep team, great coach, very good goaltending. So I think they're the team to beat. There's a second tier of teams there where I think not quite playoff locks, but pretty close. And it's really 4 teams that are going to be battling it out, I think, for the final 2 or 3 spots. Penguins are in that group. The Rangers with Igor Shesterkin, the Islanders, who took a step back last year, I think they'll bounce back, even though they're an older team too. And then the Capitals, which, you look at their team, they're certainly a wild card, but I think they're sort of in the same boat as the Penguins are every this year, they are every year in the sense that, good luck, trying to count those guys out because they always seem to find a way to produce at least during the regular season. From there, Columbus, New Jersey, they have some exciting young players. Columbus added Johnny Gaudreau. Sorry, not former Penguin Freddie Gaudreau, although that would be a great addition as well. But I think those teams are likely a year away. And then in the basement is the Flyers, which are purely a dumpster fire right now. John Tortorella's coming in, so at least that should be fun to watch to see if he literally explodes on the bench. But I think they're going to be waiting for next year or, 21, 22, 100 years down the road before they finally win that cup.
Yeah, probably. You also you did a primer post on Tristan Jarry. He's going to be going into a contract year. What does he have to do to get another contract from the Penguins? He's obviously had those issues in the playoffs 2 years ago. He struggled. This year he was injured. What does he have to do to prove that to the Penguins that he's the guy, to move forward in these late, Crosby, Malkin, Letang years?
Yeah. He's shown a lot during the regular season. I mean, he was a worthy All-Star last year. He made the All-Star team 3 years ago. He's been a really good player in the regular season. I mean, he could be more consistent. I mean, he has these stretches where he's unbelievable, and then he's just kind of, a little bit above average. I think if he can bring his A game a little bit more often, then maybe he can get into the Vezina conversation. But as far as the Penguins are concerned, it comes down to the playoffs and what he does in the postseason before they know that they can commit to this guy long term. I mean, they're all in on winning a cup in this 2, 3, 4 year window, and they can't do it without capable goaltending. So we know what happened against the Islanders 2 years ago. As you noted last year, injuries were a major factor. He got back for Game 7, was hobbled on that foot, but he did show me something and just the way he carried himself in that game with his body language and just the way he kind of interacted with opponents. He looked like someone who was not afraid of the moment. In that game, it just came down to the fact that he was playing on a bad foot and the team, had a letdown there at the end. So I'll be curious to see what he does. But yeah, I think it's just going to come down to playoffs with him. And then if he shows that he's not a liability, I think he'll get a contract. And it just comes down to trying to figure out what the right term is, because I don't know if you want to commit to this guy too far out in the future when the contending window here is 3-4 years.
Sure. Yeah. And one other guy you've been spotlighting has been Ricard Raquel. Got the big free agent deal to return to Pittsburgh after the trade brought him here, I believe, before the deadline last year. What are reasonable expectations for him, given the amount he's being paid, given the term he was given? I think some fans were frustrated that he wasn't productive as they hoped he'd be. Where do you see his immediate and maybe long-term future with this team going, and what does he have to do to make that contract worth it?
I was a little surprised that they gave him that much money and that much term. It helped that some other guys left money on the table that they could fit it in. So, I think it's a worthy gamble in the short term, but it has potential to be a contract that doesn't look great 4 or 5 years from now, but who cares? This team is in it to win it now, and they'll worry about those consequences later. But yeah, you said it. He was known as a scorer, former 30-goal guy, did it twice with the Ducks, although that was, 4, 5, 6 years ago when that happened. And I believe he only had 4 goals, but he actually surprised with both his physicality and his play as a forechecker and his playmaking, which was 2 areas that, we don't get to watch a ton of these guys out on the West Coast here in Pittsburgh, but those are 2 things that stood out to me that I didn't know having in his game. So if he can add in the scoring that he had previously on top of everything else, I think he's a worthwhile get. It helps that he has versatility. He's a righty, but he might be more comfortable on the left, so that allows them to play around with lineup configurations as well. So it just comes down to scoring, and we've seen his shooting percentage take a pretty significant dip over the last 3 years, including his time with the Ducks. He's still a guy who gets in a scoring position. We have some great stats that we use from Sport Logic that tracks all kinds of stuff. And, he's still a guy who gets into that inner slot area where, Jake Vensel gets a lot of his goals. He's effective off the rush. He's effective off the cycle. He gets to those spots in different phases, but we just haven't seen the shooting percentage there. So we'll see if he can get that back up. It can be fluky sometimes too, but I think getting 20 even strength goals would be a reasonable target for him, and add in whatever he does in the power play, and that's a pretty productive player.
Going to switch gears on you here, Matt, before we wrap up, kind of maybe go a little bit rapid fire in terms of the other teams in town. Obviously, the big conversation this week, our Joe Starkey, held nothing back on Monday, said it's Kenny Pickett time in Pittsburgh. As an outsider, what have you seen in terms of how the Steelers offense has been working? You covered the Vikings for, a while at your previous stop. And so, the NFL, what have you seen, maybe not just in the first 2 games, but in the preseason, that maybe we haven't been talking about with regard to the quarterbacks?
Well, I'll state the obvious in saying that the offensive line has struggled. Play calling is certainly questionable. Honestly, it looked more creative in the preseason when Kenny Pickett was in than it has in the last 2 regular season games with Trubisky in there. I don't know. I can give you my big picture from the couch, like thoughts on everything. But I think if you're going to draft a 24-year-old, quarterback who played like 12 years at Pitt, like Kenny Pickett did, like, I don't know, this guy looks like he's ready to go in. I don't think you have to worry about, throwing him to the wolves. He's got a lot of confidence. He's got a lot of experience. He's looked good.
We'll move on to the Pirates. I think I want to touch on this because it's been social media has been alight with it. Ke'Bryan Hayes going down and working on his sunflower routine in the middle of a play. Granted that he wasn't involved in over the weekend against the Mets in New York. A lot of people thought he should have been benched for that Saturday. because it just isn't a good look for a team that's losing a ton of games for their star third baseman to, not even appear engaged in the play, to be, spitting sunflower seeds. Did you have any thoughts on that, or is this just an example, of, at the end of a long season, people are looking for someone to get upset at, and he made himself a target?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he should not be eating during the play, but I mean, I think this is what happens when you have a losing culture, and this is just yet another season when this team was done playing meaningful baseball, in May, and it's, you don't want to see it, especially with from one of your tentpole players here. But this is the culture that they've set, and we talked about the Steelers a second ago, and they don't ever want to have a losing season, and I think there's merits maybe to having a rebuilding year in the NFL, but they believe, as Tomlin says, the standard is the standard, and winning habits get ingrained. And you look at the other side of town, or right across the parking lot there, and you have a team that has nothing to play for. I mean, Hayes, is he ever going to play for a winning team? So I do understand that, like, guys are tapped out, checking out, and that's to be expected when ownership really isn't all that serious about winning either. Get mad at ownership.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my essential opinion as well. I think if you look at Brian Hayes' overall game, you can't accuse him of loafing it in the field. He's one of the best defenders, if not the best defender in baseball. He's going to be worth 3 wins above replacement this season on Fangraphs, and that's not because he's hitting the ball particularly well. It's because he's bringing it in the field every time he's involved in the play. So I don't think it's characteristic of his game, but he's a young guy who has to recognize that because he got that big deal, because he's been at this point held up as the guy as the cornerstone of the rebuild, that those are just things you can't do. Rightly or wrongly, people are going to look at him as a leader, even if there are older guys in that clubhouse. That's the type of thing that you wouldn't have caught Andrew McCutchen doing, right? That's why he was so respected around town, is because he didn't have incidents like that. He showed up every day, and I think Brian Hayes does that in his play. But I think he has to be aware of those optics, especially when people are just looking to jump on anyone for the team struggles. You want to keep things focused on where they belong, and that definitely is ownership. And their unwillingness to kind of spend to keep up with the Joneses in MLB. So that's kind of my take. I agree with you. The other thing I wanted to touch on before we sign off here, Matt, is our alma mater. You and I both went to Penn State, and we'd be remiss not to mention the big win against Auburn over the weekend. The running game looked phenomenal again. Nick Singleton, I said I don't want to create too many comparisons to Saquon Barkley, but the breakaway, playmaking ability is something we definitely have not seen from the Penn State running game since then. Have you revised maybe your expectations for Penn State upward? I certainly picked them to go between 8-4 and 9-3, somewhere in that range. But I'm starting to think, other than those Ohio State and Michigan games, they should be favored and should win every game on their schedule, especially considering the way Michigan State played this weekend at Washington.
Yeah, we'll say I didn't get to watch the Auburn game because I was up in Buffalo watching a team of Penguins prospects play. But I don't know, this just feels like it's like your typical Penn State season where they're going to get out to like a 6-0 start. I see you're already getting excited. You're thinking about big things. They're going to lose like a random game to like Illinois or like Rutgers or something like that. They'll lose to Ohio State. And next thing you know, they're in the Outback Bowl. I hope I'm wrong. It'd be exciting as a obviously not great fan because I'm not watching these games because I'm working, but it'd be great to see them actually play in a playoff game. Maybe if they expand the field to like 16, 32, somehow they'll get in. But I think it would be cool to see. But I don't know. I think they're just getting us excited like they do every year, and then they'll fizzle out and kind of settle into that 8-9 win range that you were thinking about before the year.
Yeah, I'm curious because I just think this offense looks a lot better than I was expecting it to, and they did so. We're going to find out what kind of team Auburn is and whether they're a worthy test. Whether they even belong in the conversation with Purdue, which gave Penn State, quite the challenge. But I think the goal for this season, I think it's reasonable to expect them to try to finish in that future playoff position. I think I've said to a lot of people, I think the difference between teams 6 and 7 in college football right now is bigger than the difference between teams 7 and 40, just because of the consolidation of recruiting power that the 4-team playoff has produced. I don't really expect Penn State to compete with the Ohio States and Michigans in that regard, because especially Ohio State's been getting those prospects. But if you can put yourself in that 12-team playoff position and be in that next tier of teams when that 12-team playoff starts, I think you can start to get access to more players and hopefully if you're Penn State, compete a little bit better with Ohio State and Michigan because the playoff interest is being spread between more teams. But Matt, that's all I have for you this weekend. Do you have anything coming up in terms of your Penguins Primer preseason series that you want people to be looking out for?
Absolutely. Wednesday morning, that series concludes with 7 predictions, some of them somewhat bold for the upcoming season. I also talked to a few analysts about what we should make about this team heading into camp. You'll be able to read that on postgazette.com Thursday morning. And then training camp starts that day. And Jason Mackey and I will be out there for every practice, and we'll get going. And the next 8 months will be a blur. So I'm looking forward to it. And thank you to all you guys for reading our stuff.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on today, Matt. It was good to finally get some hockey talk going on here.
We'll do more.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll be seeing you a lot more as the season gets going. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel, and please take advantage of that subscription deal down in the description. Matt's got a lot of good stuff coming, so if you're a Penguins fan, it's a great deal to start the season. You'll be almost in the playoffs by the time it expires, so take advantage of that, and we will see all of you on Wednesday. Christopher Carter will be on here with Jason Mackey, I'm sure, talking a lot of Steelers, so check back then, and thanks for stopping by today. Take care.